Islam and Judaism, the mysteries of a 1,000-year hatred. We all know the reason why the Islamic world is always unstable. It is the division between the two branches, Sunni and Shia, currently represented by two nations, Saudi Arabia and Iran. However, despite hating each other like cats and dogs, these two have one thing in common. They both consider Jews or Judaism their sworn enemies. So why does this hatred exist? Let's explore it in today's video. From family conflicts to religion. To explain this, we need to go back to a time when neither Judaism nor Islam existed, and the concepts of Jew and Arab had not yet emerged. Here's a surprising fact for everyone. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, these three religions that have fought fiercely for millennia, all share a common origin. They are known as monotheistic religions, and their common origin stems from a figure who lived in the 2nd millennium BC, about 4,000 years ago. His name was Abraham. So why does this conflict persist? The issue is somewhat similar to the divisions within Islam itself. It stems from Abraham's descendants. The Jews trace their lineage to Isaac, born to Sarah, Abraham's first and only legitimate wife. Jews believe Isaac was Abraham's firstborn within marriage. Meanwhile, Muslims argue he was the second son. The Arabs, on the other hand, descend from Ishmael. Jewish tradition holds that Ishmael was the illegitimate son of Abraham and Hagar, Sarah's maidservant. However, Muslims believe he was the legitimate son of Abraham and Hagar within marriage. Ishmael is considered the ancestor of the Arabs. Note here that we're not debating who was right or wrong. In modern terms, Abraham could be said to have played both sides, resulting in the birth of two figures regarded as the forefathers of the Jews and the Arabs. And, as a Vietnamese saying goes, which chili isn't spicy? Which woman isn't jealous of her husband? Jealousy caused Abraham's two sons to develop animosity toward each other. Sarah urged Abraham to expel Ishmael and his mother, Hagar, from the household. Though Abraham didn't do so, this incident sparked the conflict between the two forefathers of the Jews and the Arabs. Ishmael grew increasingly resentful, while Isaac showed growing contempt for Ishmael and his mother. However, this alone wasn't enough to ignite the hatred we see today. Things only became complicated when religions emerged. Around 3,000 years ago, Judaism was born. 2,000 years ago, Christianity emerged. All coexisted on the Arabian Peninsula. Then, about 1,400 years ago, still on the mysterious Arabian Peninsula, a young man named Muhammad arrived and built Islam, drawing from Abraham's legacy. Islam acknowledges figures like Jesus, Moses, and Abraham. However, there's a crucial difference that sparked conflict and indirectly led to suffering, based on two key points. First, Muhammad only claimed to be a prophet, a messenger of God, speaking God's words to humanity. He never claimed to be God himself. Second, Muhammad introduced the Quran as the original scripture bestowed by God, the purest and most complete. In contrast, he said the Old Testament of the Jews and the New Testament of the Christians had been distorted. The Quran contains contradictory teachings about how Muslims should treat Jews. At times, it instructs Muslims to treat Jews like brothers. At others, it commands them to attack Jews if they refuse to convert to Islam. The Quran further fuels conflict by questioning which of Abraham's sons was his true heir. It teaches that Ishmael, not Isaac, was the son Abraham offered as a sacrifice to God, contradicting Genesis, chapter 22. This debate over Abraham's sons has contributed to today's conflicts. Jews naturally reject this, while Muhammad's followers believe it. Even more ironically, though both sides see themselves as righteous and the other as heretical, they both recognize Jerusalem as their holy land. King David, when founding the first Jewish state, chose Jerusalem as its capital. Meanwhile, the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven from the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Thus began a fierce struggle to prove who Abraham's rightful heir is, and most importantly, to control Jerusalem. In summary, the conflict between Jews and Arabs can be boiled down to this. Both trace their ancestry to Abraham's sons, making them half-brothers. Yet their mother's jealousy turned them into enemies. Religion acted as a catalyst, escalating tensions into full-blown battles. Each side believes they are Abraham's legitimate heirs, and the other is the foe, despite sharing the same bloodline from Abraham. Still, this is just a story from the past, tinged with mythology. The real complexity began in the 20th century, particularly with the formation of Israel. Debts of blood that must be repaid. In the past, shortly after establishing their nation, the Jews lost it to Babylon and other mighty empires, especially the Ottoman Empire, the most powerful Islamic empire in history. They were exiled across Europe and the New World for centuries, while the Holy Land of Jerusalem remained under Muslim control. So what would happen if one day the Jews had the chance to return and reclaim this sacred land? Despite being stateless and scattered for thousands of years, they never stopped hoping to return to the Holy Land where they were born over 3,000 years ago. Then, in the 19th century, a journalist and writer named Theodor Herzl rose above all with his pen. He ignited national pride, revived their history, and reminded the Jews of who they were and where they came from. He rekindled the name Promised Land, urging Jewish people to return to Palestine and revive their kingdom. Herzl published The Jewish State in 1896, arguing that the Jewish problem could only be solved by establishing a Jewish state in Palestine. Exiled Jews began returning to Palestine, where Jerusalem, 3,000 years earlier, had been the capital of the Jewish state under King David. They waited for the right moment, when the stars aligned, to reclaim the land from 3,000 years ago. That moment finally came. The First World War ended with the Ottoman Empire's defeat. Britain and France redrew the borders of nations like Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Libya. Now, the Jews could finally rise again, and this became the reason they were later hated. The story unfolded after the Second World War, when the suffering Israel endured under Nazi Germany spurred them to seek a nation of their own. The most elite Jews lobbied tirelessly, while the wealthiest bought up property in Palestine. This led Britain, France, and the U.S. to compensate Israel. Thus, a nation was reborn after 3,000 years, with 33 votes in favor, 13 abstentions, and 10 against. The UN General Assembly divided eastern Palestine into two states, one for Muslim Palestinians, the other for Jewish Palestinians, Israel. Jerusalem became a special zone under UN protection. In 1948, Israel declared independence. The Soviet Union and the United States immediately recognized the new nation, aiming to make it their ally. This was intolerable for Muslims, as the Holy Land they had long cherished was now controlled by their millennial enemy. And so began the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. An Arab coalition of 8 nations, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Palestine, united to crush the nascent Israel. Barely after declaring independence, the Jews faced yet another threat of annihilation from the Islamic world. But Israel was no feeble dynasty like the king. Rather than being torn apart by the 8-nation coalition, they rose up and crushed all 8. The Soviet Union, hoping to make Israel an ally, provided massive aid through Czechoslovakia, helping them defeat the coalition. Jews called this war national liberation, while Muslim Palestinians called it the catastrophe. It was a conflict spanning religion, territory, history, and borders. The humiliating defeat at Jewish hands was unacceptable. Israel later aligned with the U.S., rendering Soviet efforts futile, money thrown out the window. The Soviets swiftly pivoted, offering massive aid to Syria and selling arms to Egypt, seeking another chance to crush Israel. In 1967, the Six-Day War erupted. Israel won again, this time seizing Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights, forcing the Arab nations to sue for peace. Their victory wasn't due to superior weapons, but a surprise attack before the Arabs could prepare. Once again, Arabs and Jews cemented their irreconcilable enmity. Muslims regained some dignity in 1973 when Egypt and Syria, backed by the Soviets, attacked Israel and recaptured Sinai, pushing Israel into peril. Fortunately for Israel, the U.S. intervened, negotiating with the Soviets behind the scenes to save them. However, with Jerusalem still under Israeli control, it remains an unerasable stain. In 2017, Donald Trump officially recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and pledged to move the U.S. embassy there once preparations were complete. Arab nations, longtime U.S. allies, reacted furiously, calling it an unforgivable insult. To this day, though both are U.S. allies, Israel and the Arab world harbor no trust for each other. Israel lies surrounded by enemies, constantly bolstering its defenses. For Muslims, as long as Jerusalem isn't theirs, they'll keep hoping to see the Jews stateless once more.